Hi, friends, and welcome to the Next Chapter Woman podcast, where real talk meets brave steps and beautiful change. I'm your host, Diane, and around here we explore what it means to grow, heal, and thrive through the second or the third chapter of life. Whether you're reinventing yourself, starting something new, or simply searching for more peace and purpose, you're in good company here. In today's episode, Penny shares her raw and remarkable journey through adoption, identity, and reconnection. From finding out she was adopted to finally being embraced by a family she never thought she'd know. This conversation is honest, emotional, and it's full of hope. So let's dive in.
The whole trauma around adoption was a celebration and a trauma and all the other things that went with it. But discovering this new family who embraced me and welcomed me into the fold at a time when my mother's husband phoned me and said that she had passed away and they were planning a graveside service and they wanted me to come. And then getting to meet this family that I didn't know, and they didn't know anything about me. And since then, reconnecting with them, visiting with them on FaceTime, and now with, I'll call him my stepdad because that's what he wants to be called, with him in palliative care. It's a combination of learning and celebrating all this new stuff and loss. I did start to write a memoir. And as you can tell from my computer skills, I write with pen and paper. So I started to work on that, and I'm several chapters in and sort of working on a title. But the most impactful thing that's happened to me in the last few years is my birth mom made her husband promise that he would never, ever tell their kids that I existed.
You said that part of your life has been the most impactful. And so, can we unpack that a little bit? So, what has been the impact of discovering that? Well, it's either discovering that you had another family, but I think you knew that before. Am I right? You knew you had another family.
My birth mom made it clear to me that her phrase was, I can't let them know about you because they would think I was a hypocrite. And I so really? And she said, well, I raised them strictly in the church. And so having a child out of wedlock, they would have thought me a hypocrite. So I knew that they existed.
Okay, so can we go there for just a minute?
Sure.
And if it's uncomfortable for you, you just tell me and we'll move on from there because we'll get to the present. But if we can go back to that time when your mom said things like that to you, how did that make you feel? Can you describe the feelings that went through you when that happened?
I was disappointed, but way more than that, I felt that I was an embarrassment to her. The circumstances around my birth were very difficult. When I first met her, I was in my mid-30s. I went to Toronto, all excited. I'd finally found her. I'd done the whole, how do you find your birth parents when you're adopted and your records are sealed? That was a journey. When I first met her, I was in a conference in Toronto, and she walked up to me and said, are you Penny? I said, yeah. She said, my God, you look like your father. I didn't know at the time that was not a very good thing because she and my father had a very short relationship.
How did you feel when she said those things? So what was your immediate feeling when that happened? How did you deal with it?
My God, you look like your father. I didn't know that that was a bad thing in her world. I previously found my father's family, and so I had pictures of him, and I thought, yeah, I guess I do. I don't know if it was difficult, but for her finding out she was pregnant by a man who was married with 5 kids, she saw no future in that. She'd been raised by her grandparents, who were very strict Scots Anglican.
How old were you when you first found out you had a mom, a birth mom?
33.
Okay. And so when you found out about her, you were 33. How old were you when she met you in that conference and said those things to you?
It's 2 years later.
Only 2 years.
Parent Finders was a group that I belonged to that a lot of adoptees were trying to find their parents. The records were locked. So none of us could access our government records. And thankfully that has changed. Eventually got a lead and phoned a fellow who turned out to be her brother in Toronto. And he gave me the name of her husband, like the last name. And so I was in a phone booth at the train station in Toronto. I phoned and said, mother worked with a woman who back in the 50s. They worked together and she knew that her friend had moved to Toronto and asked me if I could look her up. And my birth mom said, I'm wondering if you're related or if it's someone in your family that this we might be referring to. And she said, give me some time. What number can I call you? And I'll call you back. And, I'll look into it. And so by then I'd gone back to the hotel and I gave her the number of my room at the hotel. And about 2 hours later, she phoned back and said, I know that you know that I'm your mom. So let's talk.
So you said you were 33 when you found out that you had a birth mom. Did you know that you were adopted before you were 33, or did you only find out about a birth mom at 33?
I knew. A fun story.
My guess is that you knew you were adopted. And the reason I'm saying that is because you said the words, you learn to say this kind of thing when you're adopted. What else did you tell yourself because you were adopted? Like before you were 33, from the time of 0 to 33, do you think that knowing that you were adopted changed the way you think about yourself or about the world? What was the effect of knowing that you were adopted?
I found out when I was 16, which is never a good time to 16-year-old girls don't get along with their parents anyway. And I hadn't had a happy youth with my adoptive parents. The homestead area that my grandfather homesteaded in, they do these historical books of John came from Germany and he married Sarah, etc., etc. And this book had been published. My mom was in seeing the doctor. My dad went into the drugstore, bought it, threw it in the car, and said, I'll go get your mother. So I thought, I'm going to read about Grandpa. I looked up my grandfather's name. I read the whole story. Everything was familiar. The last line was that Kathy married Steve and they have an adopted daughter and a son. So I closed the book and I said, must be the wrong family. Looked it up again, reread it, closed the book in the front seat. And that's how I found out I was adopted. I didn't say a word to my adoptive parents because I didn't have a great relationship. And initially, I was 16 and furious because I didn't talk about it to anyone. Eventually, I started to celebrate it because I really didn't like my adoptive parents. It was in a farm community. I didn't feel like I fit in. There was a boy they had adopted who was a year older than me. They got him as an infant as a failure to thrive, and I didn't arrive until I was 3. It was a very different relationship with my adoptive mom. She had this infant that needed her, and I was this independent little 3-year-old. So we didn't have a good relationship. Then I started to think, okay, that's kind of a good thing. My brother and I hardly ever interacted. My adoptive parents and I had a really contentious relationship. It went from being really angry to like, why haven't you told me? To kind of a celebration. I'm not related to you. And someday I'll find out who I'm related to.
How long did you hold on to those thoughts? And what was the point that you decided that you should look for your birth parents? I'm trying to tie that in. So you were 16 when you found out. You worked through the anger, which is kind of like you got to go through the 6 or 7 stages of a death, right? So at what point did that happen? And did that spur the reason for the search for your birth mom and dad?
At the time, I didn't tell either one of them that I knew. I didn't tell my brother. That sort of was my mantra, and I just didn't talk about it. I got married when I was 20. And when I was 21, my brother phoned and said, Dad's dead. Oh, okay. So anyway, went home to the small town I was raised in, and at my father's funeral, it was open casket, and my mother and my brother and I were hanging around the casket, and my mother turned to my brother and said, I know you know. And then looked at my brother and said, neither one of you kids were our natural kids. You were chosen. I thought, well, this is a fine time to tell my brother. Well done. Like, really. Because my brother and my dad had gotten along really well. My brother had taken over my dad's trucking company. And I said, geez, come on, Ma. Really bad timing. And it just rocked him. Like he just, he couldn't believe that he's standing over his dad's coffin and he finds out that this guy is not his, as my mom said, natural dad. So anyway,
she felt honestly that she did choose you. And so then that was her reason for not telling you sooner, and that she thought it would have made you and he feel stronger that they had chosen you.
Chosen children was an antiquated term, but at the time, I guess it fit. I mean, this is the mid 50s. She said later she always wanted to tell my brother and I, but my father wouldn't allow it.
What spurred you on to do a search for your birth mom and dad?
When I was carrying my second child, my husband developed diabetes. I thought gestational diabetes is supposed to be in the mom, but whatever. And there'd been no family history on his side of diabetes. I had two toddlers, two little boys, and I didn't know anything about my health history. And working in healthcare all my life, I thought I need to find out if there's anything in my family history that's going to impact these little guys. Their dad has developed diabetes, and there's no family history on his side. I wanted to know if there was any family history of something similar or any other chronic illnesses on my side. So that's what spurred the search. Otherwise, I'd kind of put it aside and said it's history.
Okay.
But then I thought I needed to know what my health history was.
Do you think you would have looked for them if you didn't have that reason? It's hard to think back and come up with an answer there, but what do you think?
Diane, just as an aside, my brother died 2 years after my father did of pancreatic cancer, and he was only 34. I was there with him for the 2 weeks before he died, and so was Mom. When he died, because he'd been the fair-haired child, he'd been the one who needed her and she needed to be needed, and they had a much closer bond. When he died, she looked at me and she said, my husband's gone, my son's gone, I have nothing left to live for. So I think after that, I thought, well, maybe I have a mom out there who thinks differently. Like, I don't know why she surrendered me. I was 3, for God's sake. My adoptive mom, she was funny. Not funny, haha, but when we finally talked about the fact that I knew I was adopted, she said, you were a difficult child. You didn't come when you were called. You kind of changed my first name when I was 3. I didn't know who you were talking to. I was pretty sure you weren't my mom. I knew who my mom was. I knew I didn't have a dad. I didn't have a brother. Like, I can remember those kinds of things clicking through. Just, where am I? Who are these people? And where's my mom? So after my brother passed away, I carried on with being a wife and mom and working full time and all the rest. Mike developed diabetes, and it took a very long time. The records were sealed. There was all these roadblocks, governmental roadblocks. I don't know how many letters I wrote and got the same response. The records are sealed. We can't tell you. Our records show that you were a healthy child and your family was musically inclined. So then I started looking at what were the alternatives, and there were groups of adoptees at the time who had developed strategies of how to lie through your teeth and try and get the information. Yeah, and how to, like, okay, that didn't work. What else can I do?
Right.
And yeah, so they came up there. There was a lot of different strategies, and so it did take a while.
So coming, it's not necessarily full circle, but jumping ahead now to recently, you shared with me that you embraced the opportunity to get to know your other family that you didn't get to know.
Yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit about meeting them for the first time? Just basically feelings. I'm looking to get inside of your head what you thought about that time and the positive experience now coming from that.
Has asked me to call him dad, but my mother's husband,
Your birth mother.
one of the times that I'd met my mom, she never invited me to her home in Toronto, but I met her 3 or 4 times in Toronto at different conferences that I was going to. And we usually went to the cafeteria at Eaton's. My mother and I were having coffee at Eaton's. She kept saying, I don't have any pictures of you, but she kept bringing more pictures of me when I was little. Her husband showed up and she said, what are you doing here? And he said, I wanted to meet her because she had shared with him from the time they met that I existed, but that she didn't want to have contact and she didn't want her kids to know. And so he and I ended up being Facebook friends. She didn't know anything about it. And so when she passed away, he contacted me, gave me the future date of her service at the cemetery, and said, I want you to come. And by the way, I've told my kids about you, and they all want to meet you. So I went and met them all at the graveside. But I was there for a week, and there's Kathy's the oldest, and then there's 2 boys. Kathy and I went for coffee for a couple of hours one day. She talked about how it all made sense now around mom, that mom would go shopping for baby clothes. She would knit baby clothes. I'm sure she was incredibly traumatized by what happened. Kathy and I developed a really close friendship. The middle boy is a Downs boy. And Michael just, because I have white hair and so did my mom, he looks at me and says, you're mom, but mom's dead. He can't compute. The other fellow is just wonderful. They have embraced me, and Kathy said, like it or not, you're stuck with us. You're part of our family now.
That make you feel
very special.
Pretty darn special.
Yeah. And I had some baby pictures of a christening and then some toddler pictures that came with me when I was adopted. And I shared them with Kathy. And there was these little smock dresses. There was 3 of them. And Kathy said, oh my God, I have those. Mom kept those. She put me in them. And do you want them back? And I said, well, no, you've got a daughter. I don't. So when your daughter has a little one, just carry it on down. But yeah, there was apparently a couple of sweaters and those 3 little dresses that my mom kept. So, initially
That said
I thought
about
you
your
didn't
mom.
want me. You'd had it with being a single mom, but it really impacted who she was later in life. She kept all this baby stuff.
How did you feel about learning that about your mom? Did it change the way you thought about her?
I forgave her. At the time, she was living with another woman. They had met each other and were living here. Her friend was going to school and mom was working. My mom's boss found out that she was a single mom and started sexually harassing her, saying, you did it once, you can do it again. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for her. She just couldn't do it anymore. When her grandparents who had raised her found out that she was pregnant, they phoned the archdiocese in Toronto, who phoned the archdiocese in Edmonton, and they put her on a train. She was 3 months pregnant. They put her on a train in Toronto to Edmonton to the Beulah Home for Unwed Mothers. That was such a draconian thing to do. And she got through it and made a life for herself.
Yeah.
Just, wow. So yeah, I have a whole lot more respect for her. Originally, I was angry. Of course, you're going to be angry. I mean, you ditched me when I was 3. What was wrong with me? And it wasn't anything that was wrong with me. It was just the circumstances of the time.
If you could say something to that 16-year-old or that 20-year-old who hadn't met their birth mom yet, they were still in an adoptive family and struggling with that, what would you say to yourself at that 16 or 20-year-old stage? Would there be some words of advice or counsel from you to you?
To the 16-year-old, just let go of the anger. The anger isn't going to get you anywhere. The anger is just going to make things worse. And it did until I left home. I left home when I was 17. Being angry didn't improve the relationship I had with the adoptive people who were raising me. Own it, let it go, but don't let it eat you up. That anger is tough to get past. I have struggled with putting anger behind me my whole life. And maybe that was the beginning. Maybe it was the beginning when I was 3 and she said, "You were a difficult child. You didn't come when you were called." I don't know.
Well, I'm wondering if the anger piece, and I'm really guessing at this, but I'm wondering if that kind of anger that long is like taking a shovel full of stuff out of your own world and tossing it over. So you're left with a hole. And then if that's the case, what would you suggest to fill that hole with so that you come back to an evenness? I know you mentioned you can't be angry all the time. You need to move on or something like that. Can you paraphrase?
Being angry doesn't feel good. Sadly, it kind of fit with my experience with my adoptive parents. It was a bad relationship from day one. And being angry wasn't going to serve me any purpose moving forward. So looking forward to just let it go. You're leaving home in a year, you're going to university, and you're going to start a new life. Just let it go. And it wasn't easy.
You know that book that I have read over the last little while, the Let Them book. So that kind of fits what you're saying, the let them part, but then maybe you struggled with the let me. That's my version of, okay, what did you fill the hole with? How should I think now moving forward, having forgiven her, but what am I going to do and think now? And maybe you didn't get there.
Diane, one of the struggles I had growing up was self-esteem. I was a straight A student. I was a jock. I did all these things right. And my brother struggled really hard to get a C. And I'd come home with a report card and it'd have all A's and an A minus. And she said, "Well, what's with that? That's not good enough. You need to do better. Why can't you be more like your brother?" But the not good enough theme followed me for a long time.
And I would change those words. It didn't follow you. You carried it. I guess what I'm saying is,
Yes.
you
I have a family and I am good enough.
yes, exactly. So then you discovered a family and you discovered a dad. And not only that, but your family embraced that too. And so I look at your face, you've just totally changed in the outward appearance of those thoughts that are working through your head, like the joy and relief and thanksgiving and excitement about this newness that came into your life. Am I right there?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, I went through university and then went into my chosen healthcare field and excelled. The not good enough stuff faded, but it was always there in the background. And it's not there anymore. My Downs brother gives me a big hug and says, "Hi, Mom." And it's interesting because they've all said, "I am the only one that looks like her." The 3 of them look like their dad. I'm the only one that looks like her. So it's being welcomed, it's being acknowledged, and just that sense of love.
So, what will you do with that now looking forward? We've covered a lot of hurt, right? We've uncovered the lead up to some joy and to some changes in your life. Like it is a big change. in 2 or 3 ways, right from the beginning to the end. You've been going through all of these changes. So what are you going to do with all that changing, if anything? Like, it doesn't have to be, well, I'm going to save the world. Just look at it that way. What's next for Penny?
Oh, okay. So what am I going to do with this? I've always been a writer. In high school and university, I had essays and poems published. And I've taken a couple of memoir writing courses. I kept on working on it, and I've got a working title in the first 3 chapters. The reason I'm doing it, it's kind of a purge because I can edit it out if I don't like what I've written. My kids don't know this story, and it would take a fair bit to sit these 45, 46-year-old men down. they 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 honestly don't know the story. So while I'm above the green, I think I'll write it and give them the option to get to know or not. The working title that I've been struggling with, there's 2, and it's going to be one of the 2. My birth name was Allison, and I was Allison until I was 3. My birth certificate that I have right now was issued when I was 4. It's either going to be Becoming Allison or Finding Allison.
Both are good.
We'll work on it. Yeah, it's cathartic to write. Sometimes when I reread what I've written, I say, okay, I thought you were going to put the anger away. You've spent way too much money in therapy, and the anger is coming through again. Why is that?
Mhm.
What's happening? I think that's part of doing that kind of reflection.
Well, and maybe part of the answer is being able to write the answer. What sometimes holds us back is that it doesn't get written down. It just keeps going around and around in your head.
From what I've learned in these memoir writing courses that I've taken is, I mean, they talk about scene and set and all this other stuff, but it's how do you start is one of the challenges. I have started and done the first chapter like 8 or 9 times because I thought you have to get something that'll catch the audience. From being a virgin to a mother to be on the beaches in Toronto under the influence of a bottle of lemon gin. Is that a good way to start the book? Could be, but it's not my story, it's hers.
Maybe that's the wrong answer or the wrong question to ask. Maybe the question isn't, is that the good way to start a book or the wrong way to start a book? Maybe don't ask that question. I think you're too much in your head. It's a little bit about being that perfectionist, that achiever that you always have been, but you're trying
Tell me I'm not good enough. I am good enough and I'll prove it.
Yes. And so you're trying to make it perfect, and the book is never going to get done. And you know what? I'm not talking to just you. I'm also talking to me because I know this about me. Sometimes it just takes that nudge or to try a different way. That's all I'm doing with myself. Partly this podcast is part of that as well. Guess who learns the most? We could have 1,000 people looking at any of the sessions. Guess who learns the most in any of them?
You.
Me. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the perfectionism has stayed with me, especially with the written word, all my life. When I was a manager and district manager in healthcare, my moniker was the grammar bitch, and that was okay. I could proofread anything. I can go to a theater and look at the playbill and say, there's a spelling mistake there. I can look at the restaurant menu, there's a spelling mistake there. In healthcare, they would send the new policy drafts to me to review and fix.
I have some help for you, but not in this video. That's a whole nother video, how to stop that thing from happening. And it goes with you for the rest of your life. But there are some strategies to make that a little bit more tolerable for others. It never has to be tolerable for us, but it's the others.
Yeah.
All right. So you've got some good things looking forward now with your new family and the connections that you've made that you probably never thought was possible. Maybe.
No.
Maybe you wished that it would be. Does that hit a bell?
Coincidentally, I found out that my birth father died at 63 and was an alcoholic. My adoptive father died at 63 as an alcoholic. When I hit 64, I made it. Can you rephrase the question for me again, Diane?
I was thinking, looking back about this time of your life and the positive experiences you've had at the end of finding that family part. There was thoughts that fleeted through there. Either I'm thinking you thought that was never going to be for you because you were whatever you were, or you maybe hoped or dreamt that would happen for you too. I'm thinking either one or the other.
When I started looking, I had a friend in Edmonton who was from a very large family. And she said, Pen, don't look for family. They're a pain in the ass. They're live without them. Like, okay, well, for you, that's true. The other part of it, I mean, it's been such a joy. And like Kathy says, you're stuck with us now. My stepdad is now in palliative care. I went out to Toronto to see him for a week, and I don't know what his timelines are. No one does. And it's a little scary thinking that, because he's the glue that brought us all together. I have to put the effort into staying connected with them after he's gone. I can't expect them to do that because they lived with him for their entire lives. So I have to make sure that I have a plan in place to stay connected when he's gone. I don't want to lose what I wasn't really searching for my whole life, but I certainly was searching for from my 30s on, and I'm 70 now. It was a lot of years of searching. I can't let that go.
Do you feel confident that you're able to accomplish that?
Mark and Kathy are well versed in FaceTime, and Kathy is retiring at the end of this month. She's been a teacher. Mark's retired, so there's no excuse for not staying in touch. We all have a good connection, and I can't lose that. I text Dad every day. Sometimes he's able to respond and sometimes not, but I can't lose what I spent how many years trying to find. I just can't. I met 3 of my dad's kids out of the 5. He said he wasn't a father to us. He abandoned us. I found a family that wants me to be part of the family, and I need to nurture that. Keep it going.
There you go. If you could come up with part of your character and coming through the last 50 years, basically, coming through that piece to your character has been a certain way all the way along. And so coming out of it and getting to the ending of that story, I mean, just saying, yes, we found our family, found our tribe. So is there a character strength that you think you've developed through this process that has helped you through this and that you'll hold on to for the foreseeable future?
The first word that comes to mind is determination. You decide to do something and you follow through and you do it. Probably both personally and professionally, that has followed me through my whole career.
I was going to say that's not new.
From the day I left home at 17, I'm leaving. I think one of the things that this journey, and especially the last 2 years since Mom died, and getting to know the new family and feeling like Dad keeps saying, I'm so proud I have 2 sons and 2 daughters now. And it softened that angry edge a lot. I don't have any reason to be angry anymore. I could go back to all sorts of things that happened in my adoptive home and say I'm angry about that, but there's absolutely no purpose in that. What I have now is I've got some joy now, and I want to celebrate the joy.
One of the thing that I think would be fun to explore with you, and maybe you've done this in your past. I follow along with Martin Seligman's positive psychology, and I have for like 20 years, knowing that we have 22 or 24 strengths. Everybody has 22 or 24. Some we use more than others. We rank those strengths, right? Those top 5 or 10, that's what we build our life on mostly. They don't change a whole lot, but sometimes there's some on that bottom part that could serve us well in certain scenarios. The lesson is, how do we move some of those up? And when do we know that one of these 10, if we overuse it, like the determination, I'll pick on you for a second and then I'll give you my example. So overusing that determination, if you overuse it, then it gets to be a bit of a negative. And so then it's bringing something else up to fill in some of that gap so that you temper that determination a little. Dana, my daughter, would say to me, of the 22 strengths that I've clocked on myself over the last 20 years, love of learning has always been number one. Always number one. She'll say to me when we're struggling with something, well, Mom, do you think you might be overusing your love of learning strength? And it brings you, she's so gentle and she knows not to tell me what, but when she put it that way, I thought, I think you're probably right, because that love of learning makes me procrastinate until everything's perfect, until I've learned everything that there is to know about a certain situation. And then I can go through with confidence. I can make it good, but I got to learn about it. So, Mom, do you think that love of learning, those positive psychology and that positive way of thinking in not a woo-woo way, but in a cut and dried, here's what you do, here's some things to try. It's been really helpful for me over the years. And it's fun to do.
Yeah, it's something I would look forward to for sure. In the memoir writing courses that I've taken, one of the things that I really have struggled with and I continue to struggle with is get rid of perfection and just flight of ideas, just write.
Exactly.
And forget about, oh, I spelt that wrong and crossing it. No perfectionism. And that's a struggle for me. And
Really?
I can say delete, delete, delete. Well, at least it'll be spelled properly.
So, Penny, is there something that you'd like to share with us? It is the ending of our time during this episode. So I want to thank you, first of all, for spending your time with us and giving us the opportunity to learn through your experiences, both good and not so good. Thank you for letting us share that with you and learn from it. I have a question for you to wrap things up. If you had 2 or 3 sentences on what would be your takeaway from this last hour, and just listening to your own words and what it is that you said with us, what's the takeaway that we can all walk away from?
I think everyone has their own trauma, their own diversity. And regardless of that, able to move forward and acknowledge the trauma and put it in its own little box where it belongs back there, and just look forward to the future and look forward to cherishing. There are good parts of my whole story, even with my adoptive parents. There weren't very many, but there were some good parts. Just making sure you take those with you, because the bad stuff, it's back there, but the good stuff is what you keep you going. And one of the therapists that I went to said, "You're a survivor." I really struggled with that term for a long time, and I've spun it around. I'm a thriver, not a survivor.
Yeah.
And nobody's had a perfect life, not like those things on Hallmark where everybody has a loving mother and a loving father and 2 sisters who hug each other all the time. I'm not sure how real that is in the world, but it wasn't in mine. But just take the joys with you. We don't know how many days we have. My family in Toronto has made a big difference. Simon and Garfunkel's song about I am a rock no longer applies. I'm a little softer now, and I hope that's what I carry with me. So, guess that's it.
That was awesome. You started off with Simon and Garfunkel, and then you ended with that, and so meaningful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for being a friend.
Thank you, Diane. This has been more than I expected.
I hope today's conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe even something to feel a little differently about. And thank you to Penny for sharing so openly and bravely today. What a gift. If you've ever felt like your past defines your future, Penny's story is your invitation to think again. Healing is always possible, sometimes in ways we never expect. If her story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're navigating a life transition yourself, grab the free reflection sheet linked in the description below. Until next time, remember, you're not too late, you're not too much, and your next chapter is waiting.